And we're live. Hey everyone, Hugo Bowne-Anderson from Coiled here. Welcome to our very special Coiled launch live stream. We've got a bunch of wonderful friends and colleagues and collaborators here to join us to, among other things, gently heckle us or critique our product. But I would love for everyone who's joining to introduce themselves in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from. And what you're interested in and what you do and why you're here. I'm here with a regular, there's nothing regular about Matt, but he is a regular host and occasional guest here on our live streams. But I'd love all our guests and friendly critiquing panel to introduce themselves. So take it away. Maybe we can start with Jeremiah.
Sure. You can all hear me now, right? I was having an audio problem a moment ago. We're all good? Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremiah. I'm the CEO of a company called Prefect that makes data pipelining tools that are built on top of Dask and just work a hell of a lot better when they're run on Dask. And I've been using Dask for about 5 years since the very beginning. So this is very exciting. This is very exciting. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Who'd like to introduce themselves next? Chelle, let's do it.
Hi, I'm Chelle Gentemann. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Sound great.
Okay. I'm Chelle Gentemann. I'm a remote sensing scientist. I am a physical oceanographer and I try to measure the ocean from space and improve long-term weather forecasts. I use Dask to do science because I'm using really big data sets.
Awesome. Thanks, Chelle.
Yeah.
And Hamel?
Hi, my name is Hamel Husain. I work at Github. I'm a machine learning engineer there. I do some work with creating DevOps tools for data scientists. I also do some open source work, a lot of work with Fast AI, for example, and some other projects. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I also use Dask.
Cool. So this is a unique opportunity. We have a gag here where I ask Matt what Dask is, and he always defers to our guest. So maybe just each of you could give us a short elevator pitch on Dask, like 30 seconds or something like that. And of course, we'll get correlation as we go on, presumably. But maybe we can start in reverse order. Maybe you can tell us what you use Dask for, Hamel.
So yeah, I use Dask to help parallelize, to scale my data frames. That's the best way I can describe it.
That's awesome. That's the most concise, clear elevator pitch I've heard on Dask. That's great. How about you, Chelle?
I think Dask is ushering in a new era of science where we're going to be able to think about questions and ask completely different questions than we were before when we were constrained by memory.
Amazing.
Great pitch.
Jeremiah, that is a tough act to follow. Ushering in a new era of science. I mean, you're done, man. No, tell us.
I mean, what can I add? What can I add? That's just all the nobility in the world. My stock answer for Dask is it's the easiest way to parallelize Python. Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
Not as grand, perhaps, but just a little more utilitarian.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I work in marketing at Coiled, among other things. I've just got 3 amazing quotes that we're going to really put out there. So Matt, take it away.
Yeah, those introductions are actually a great way to sort of explain what we're doing here today. So as the audience knows, we often do live streams. We're bringing in Dask users who show us their workload and we look at it and we all learn from it. It's actually really fun to see how people do their development environments, how they learn about things. It's a fun place to play around with. Today we're doing something different. So this week we launched Coiled's product, Coiled Cloud, which makes deployment of Dask very easy. The pitch is Dask for everyone, everywhere. And as someone who's made software for a long time, I know that early software generally sucks and early products generally suck. Coiled is at a point where it is useful. It is good, it is productive. It's the way that I love to use Dask, but it can be a lot better. And we only get better by constructive criticism. And so you 3 are chosen because you come from kind of the 3 different realms in which Dask is used today. Right? Hamel comes from like sort of traditional sort of data engineering, machine learning kind of workflow. Chelle comes more from the sort of like array computing scientific background. And Jeremiah comes more from sort of like ad hoc, I'm going to build some other tool on top of Dask with Dask sort of lower level features. And so you all come from different backgrounds, which is great. And the plan today is for me to be the person giving demonstrations or showing stuff, and for the three of you to be heckling, or constructively heckling, if you want to be gentle to me, and sort of representing the broader audience in how we might improve the product as it is today. I've got 4 workflows. We may not get through all of those, but we can start going through them. And I expect at least one of those to crash and burn hard. But I expect all of them to have problems. I'm happy to point out those problems, but I would also love your help in thinking a little bit about how we can make Coiled better. Also, people who are in the live stream, we would love your engagement here. I'm going to use the public product. Anybody can do everything that I'm doing on my laptop from home. Yeah, that's the plan. I'm happy to jump in, unless Hugo, you have something else you want to...
I just want to say constructive criticism and heckling in the chat is also welcome. I am aware that it's far easier to heckle in text than it is on video when you actually have to talk to humans. The other thing is, with respect to the heckling, I've made a feature request to Zoom for digital tomatoes that you can throw at people, but that hasn't come through yet. So
I'm not sure I'm completely on board with this heckling idea here.
We'll find out.
It's the weirdest product launch I've ever been part of.
We'll find out. And then also at the end of this session, so last week we did this different thing where we all went into the system Gather Town, where we can sort of chat and meet people and everyone can talk to everybody. It's full audience engagement. So if you're around for the end of the session, it'd be great to see you there and actually see you and talk to you. And some other folks might be there too. So it'd be fun.
And I'll just add, we've got some comments in the chat already. Chris White from Prefect just says, this has been far too pleasant so far. So
Chris is going to be good at heckling.
Maybe we should get Chris on the call. Okay, let's jump in, Matt. This is fun already.
Okay, so yeah, very briefly, Coiled is Dask for everyone, everywhere. We recently, so if you go to coiled.io and you hit this button, you'll be put in a situation where you can launch Dask. I'm gonna do a lot of those same things. So if you want to play at home, please do. We launched recently, which meant that we wrote a blog post and tweeted that blog post. And I think Hugo and Jeremiah were talking before the call of there's 3 lines of code in that blog post. One is pip install coiled, and the others are import coiled and coiled.cluster. So I'm going to do that here. And this is all that you need to know in order to deploy Dask at scale.
So, yeah, we've got your terminal. Great.
Good to go. Can you guys see my screen? I'm hoping you see my screen.
Yep.
So we have worked for a long time to make this very simple. So while that's running up, let me talk about what we're doing. So Dask is a library that helps other Python libraries scale out. So, Dask data frame, what Hamel was talking about, libraries like Dask array, X array, what Chelle works with, or Prefect, systems that Jeremiah works on. What we find is that Dask is really accessible for individuals on laptops. But once you want to move to multiple machines, there's this other set of challenges around deploying stuff on the cloud. You might, I'm going to go to the Dask docs here for a second. You might use something like SSH or an HPC job scheduler or Kubernetes or a Hadoop Yarn cluster or the cloud or something else. And there's a bunch of stuff around that. It ends up being really challenging for anybody who doesn't have a dedicated DevOps team behind them. And so at Coiled, we want to be that dedicated DevOps team for everyone. We've done this in hundreds of different situations in previous jobs, and we're trying to make the system that we wanted to exist all the time. So on the right, I am authenticating myself with a Coiled web service. I am then asking Coiled to launch some resources for me, in this case on AWS, and I am then connecting up to those machines. That just finished. That took about a minute. This is maybe my first wart of this experience, is that minute-long delay, and that's kind of a pain. But then if I'm sort of Dask savvy, I know I can make a client object around that cluster. Get a little warning here that my versions are mismatched.
Can you describe what the client object is exactly a little bit?
Yeah, so the client object tells Dask to use the cluster that we just spun up. So when I might use a library like Dask array to make an array of random values. And when I run some computation, like I did here with this persist call, it goes and looks around like, hey, where should I run this? Should I run this on a local thread pool on this machine? Should I run this on some Kubernetes cluster? Where should I run it? And so this cluster object and this client object sort of jointly tell Dask where to run things. If you're familiar with Spark, this is kind of like the Spark context, that sort of thing. The client has also a bunch of other methods on it. I can restart the cluster if I want to, for example. So all those things go away.
So it'll look for this client object.
Say again?
Sorry, please, Hamel.
No, so when you run a command, it'll look for this client object, and it'll use that to know what cluster to connect to and all that.
Yeah, and the client has a lot of other capabilities. I can submit some function on some value and get back a future if I want to do arbitrary things. Right, so the client is also like a general sort of entry point for a lot of Dask functionality. But if you're using libraries like Dask Array or Dask Data Frame or Prefect, you may not be aware of it because it's often being handled behind the scenes. Again, the behind the scenes aspect is what Coiled is really trying to handle for you.
Matt, where is this running?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is all running on AWS. So
and can I control where it runs? Like, do I have options for which cloud I want to use or which region?
Yeah. So right now we're on AWS only and Kubernetes for on-prem folks. But yeah, so there's things like region. So I could run this on, EU West 1 if I wanted to. I can specify different software I want it to manage. I can ask for GPUs, all that sort of stuff.
And we have a question in the chat, Matt, around data staying on-prem or where the data is when you want to access stuff.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue into playing with some data. So let me use that to move on a little bit. I'm going to ask also, right now I have, I think, 4 machines. Got 4 machines, each with 4 threads. Let's scale up a little bit, which, if you're on the cloud, is let's
and I'm sorry, Matt. I also got to say, if I was heckling right now, I'd be pulling you up on so many things. What are these warnings that are happening? Why am I getting warnings when I'm just trying to spin up a cluster all of a sudden?
Excuse me, Hugo. I can't help but think you're heckling your hecklers for doing a bad job right now.
I feel attacked.
That's a great point. And let's get to that in a second. I want to answer
the old Australian, because we live upside down. It's the old mirror image reverse heckling.
What are the warnings? I'm not seeing any warnings right now at the moment, at least.
I think Hugo's talking about this. Yeah. Mismatched versions found. And we're going to get into it in just a second, because this is actually we've spent like months trying to resolve this. I'm going to go a little bit more of a demonstration. And then I want to talk about it with some of these words. I've got some words in mind. Hugo, I think, has the same things in mind. But let me talk about what I'm doing first. So someone in the chat was asking about, like, how do I access data, is my understanding. And so the first thing I showed you was like random numbers. This is the fallback to any tech demo. Right? Use random numbers, do some computation, looks very cool. But what happens if I have company data that's in some S3 bucket and I want to manage that data instead? Right. So here, I'm using just the NYC tax lab data set, and I'm loading it in and computing some average values off it. This is going slowly, so ahead of time I scale out to 20 machines. In about a minute, those machines will come by, and we'll see that things will start moving a lot faster. Which looks like they're starting to come by now. But what's great here is that I actually you need to have credentials in order to talk to this data set. It's public access, but you do need to be authenticated. And so somehow Coiled is grabbing my local authentication and is propagating that to my Dask workers. And so if you are from your laptop able to look at data or manipulate things on AWS, Coiled will grab your local credentials, generate secure tokens, forward those appropriately so that your clusters on AWS look and feel like you. They can do everything that you can locally. And so there we go. We got to analyze,
So I always thought these dashboards are really cool. But then I kind of never know how to use it properly, like what I should be looking for in terms of looking for something wrong that I need to change.
Yeah.
Is that a separate conversation? Maybe that's not appropriate for this.
That is a great conversation. And there's like a whole YouTube video just on interpreting these dashboards. But actually, that gives me an opportunity to not talk. Chelle or Jeremiah, you I think both have more experience with the Dask dashboard. Looking at this dashboard, does anything seem wrong to you?
So I always think red means something is wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Okay. Or does anyone in the chat, can they interpret maybe what is wrong here? What happened that is wrong? And that's, now I'm recognizing there's a 20-second lag between chat and video. So there's a lot of red. So when we scaled out our machine, we had a lot of work on these 4 machines. We got 20 machines, and so Dask started to like move some stuff around the cluster to sort of balance things out. So that was one case in which, yeah, looking at the dashboard, understanding what's going on can tell us a little bit about why things were inefficient. In this case, our worker pool changed rapidly, and so Dask was, in order to use all those machines, it had to spread some stuff around. But
hey Matt, can I try and tie 2 things that we just talked about together?
Please.
I had a question. Before we started, I had spun up Coiled, and I had created a cluster because we were talking about how I was just so impressed it's only 3 lines of code and I wanted to see for myself. And then it actually started running, and I went into the dashboard and I actually saw that there was a cost column there. And so if I'm taking that plus what we just talked about, what I understand is it was picking up my AWS credentials sort of automatically, right? And just it was deployed into my VPC. I was confused at first, to be honest, because I was surprised that I was able to do that.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yeah, so far, all we've been doing is I've been playing on IPython on my laptop, connected up to this cluster in the cloud. And we should talk about that for a second. But there's also this whole other side of Coiled, which is the web application at cloud.coiled.io. I'll put that here so it's a little easier to see maybe. Yeah, so at cloud. Whoops, I'm in resize mode. Yeah. So right now, Coiled is telling me, look, I've got a cluster of 20 machines up and running. That's costing me about $5 an hour. And you can see the cost sort of ticking up here over time. So it's 35 cents right now, 36 cents, et cetera. I can go and see logs and stuff like that. Yeah, so Jeremiah, right now, everything in Coiled is free. So we are paying for all of the costs. What's here is just sort of let you know what's going on. Can
I heckle you for not making that more clear to me? Like that should be everywhere.
Yeah, no, and it should be, totally. There's actually a ton of issues about this exact same point, because people do get concerned about if you're going to try something and you see like a dollar figure starting to tick up, you get a little bit concerned. But yeah, so right now, Coiled is free for everybody, but you will be limited. So if you try to, I might ask, not for 20 machines, but for 1,000 machines, we're going to say no, right? And so Coiled has all the infrastructure to apply quotas and apply, cost tracking to everybody. And so that allows you, so I was on this other, I was playing around with Nipari developers earlier. And so, Nipari has a larger core limit. They can use a lot more at the same time. And, certain users can use more of that or less of that. So Coiled comes with all of those sort of cost management stuff. But
so what's Nipari?
Nipari is, in this case, it's an account of image scientists that work sometimes with us. But there's also other groups here.
And the software is an image viewer for high-res biomedical imaging. Yeah.
So you mentioned that Coiled can run on-prem. Will you get the same cost dashboard when you run it on-prem? And then what does that what does that represent in that case?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, on-prem users don't usually care that much about costs. They much more care about like how many compute hours have you burned, and we would probably replace it in that case. So I mean, what we do is we track every CPU second and every gigabyte second and every like GPU memory second that you use, and then we, on the front end, render that slightly differently depending on how you're running. To your previous question, Jeremiah, if you wanted to give us AWS credentials, you could do so, and we would just launch things out of your AWS account. And that is actually how most people who are not sort of on the free tier will run.
Yeah, I was some combination of surprised and confused, but now that you've told me that you're footing to go for it, I'm like, well, hell yeah. But tell me that.
Yeah.
And Matt, if I'm an individual AWS user, it can be really expensive to run a lot of processes. Whereas if I'm an institution and I can buy with an institutional rate, it can be a lot cheaper. So how if you want a group of people that you're going to do a bulk buy of AWS credits, how does that work? Then you all just log on to that AWS credit account.
Yeah, what would happen is that you would get a bunch of credits from AWS. You would follow our documentation and you would construct an IAM role that had enough permissions to do everything that Coiled needs to do. You would make an account. So I had, like the Napari account here, maybe there's dev for a bunch of the Dask maintainers, or a bunch of the Coiled maintainers. And then you would associate that AWS account to the Coiled account. And then Coiled would run things on your behalf with your credentials inside of your account.
And is there a way, let's say it's 10,000 people, or 5,000 people, is there a way to do individual tracking?
Yeah, so everybody is tracked. There's kind of two questions there. One, are we tracking use by individuals? And yes, we're definitely tracking use by every individual that's running everything every second. Two, I don't necessarily want to sign up 10,000 people to Coiled. Can we integrate with some other sort of authentication system, right? Maybe you use Active Directory inside your institution. That's definitely something that, yes, we're working on. Heckling, more heckling, anybody?
Yeah,
heckling?
I've got some.
Yeah.
But this is a different type of heckling. It's not. I'm impressed by the amount of visibility users have into what's happening, and cost and like that. That's a really nice view. So I just wanted to congratulate you and the Coiled engineers on that.
That's not heckling at all, Hugo.
That's not heckling. What kind of heckling is that?
Do you know what heckling is? Is that why you invited us to this?
I'm questioning that myself now.
Okay.
Matt, I'm gonna not. You're not gonna. This is gonna be one of those things where you only get 3 lines of code in. So when you start this up, you can also open up notebooks, because most scientists are used to using notebooks rather than IPython. And so you can run Jupyter notebooks. So this is sort of a different experience than when I try to go to a Jupyter hub and then I spin up a Jupyter hub. Like explain to me the difference, because that's usually my workflows. I go to a Jupyter hub that's based in the cloud somewhere that someone set up for me. And sometimes it has Kubernetes and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it has Dask and sometimes it doesn't. And
I want to talk, I have like tons of thoughts on this topic. I want to talk about that. And maybe, let's just jump over now. What I was going to do is I was going to look at I'm going to briefly summarize what I was going to do here, and then we'll move over. What I like about this is that I, from a local place, was able to access and analyze comfortably a remote data set that's on the cloud. Right? I can do this from my laptop, I can do this from Jupyter Hub, I can do this from SageMaker, I can do this from anywhere. And that gives me the ability to, or anybody now, the ability to inspect these public data sets. So I actually was looking at, in 2019, the total passenger count was like 130 million taxi rides in New York City. Just before this call, I was doing the same thing, but looking at 2015, I think. And it was wildly different. It was like double, roughly. The number of cab rides in the city of New York has gone down by about half, which I found to be, this because of Uber and Lyft and everything. But it was fun that I could just play around, right? Anybody in the world can now go and play around with these public data sets from anywhere. But to your point, Chelle, let's go and play with notebooks.
And while that's loading, I'll just say we've got a great question from Joe Schmidt, which is in the spirit of heckling. How many P3 16x large instance hours would it take to burn through Coiled's recent round of funding?
That is all an exercise left for the reader, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's great.
But on Coiled Cloud. Jump on and try it out.
Yeah. Chelle asked a question, how about notebooks? What's the notebook experience like? We're doing that now. So I'm asking for a notebook. It's gonna take about a minute or two to come up. While that's happening, let me share a fun anecdote. So if we get to it, the last demonstration I have here is playing with Napari, this image viewer, and GPUs. We like really wanted to use GPUs to do a lot of image processing. Turns out to just be like a total game changer. But when we were running this with Coiled, like things were not working. The GPUs just were not coming up. We're wondering like why, what's broken? We spent like lots of times figuring out why things are broken. And it turns out that just AWS on US East 2 was out of the T4 GPU that we were playing with. And it took us a long time to find that in logs. So now we're working on like propagating those logs back. But it was fun that we got to sort of exhaust AWS's ability to provide us a resource. And that was a limitation, not Coiled. Anyway, so Chelle, you asked about notebooks. And so, yeah, so you were used to opening up Jupyter Hub, logging in there, probably having your Jupyter Hub instance be sort of Dask enabled, so it can also launch Dask things. And that's great. You probably have like your local development environment there. You maybe pip install things there, I'm not quite sure. You maybe have like a Docker image that you know is there that holds your software environment. And so Coiled provides a lot of that same infrastructure. There are things like software environments where you can ask Coiled to create custom things. So I was playing around with Prefect the other day, and I made a little software environment, just a few pip packages, pretty simple. And I uploaded that to Coiled. Coiled made a Docker image for me, and I can use that when I create some notebook.
Matt, could you just tell us what else can go in an environment? I see pip, conda. Is there a spec for this that we can look at somewhere?
Yes, there is. That's a great question. Oops, not docs.dask.org, but docs.coiled.io. Has a ton of information. You're asking about software environments. And so, yeah, there's a ton of information here about what software environments do and how to create them. And so awesome. This is a nice way if you just want a service that makes compatible, friendly Docker images and share those Docker images, right? Anybody can use these things or share these conda environments and uses them nicely.
Is a good way to understand that is kind of like a way to create a Docker image without knowing that much about Docker, or is that off?
That's the right way of putting it. What we've found, right? So Chelle and I both worked in a community called Pangeo, which is maybe the first like Jupyter Hub Dask deployment anywhere. It was actually part of like an American Meteorological Society keynote that I was giving at some point. It was super fun to build, and like we got to give everybody the experience of running these massive computations, all from just like logging into a website. So here I'm running some XGBoost thing. This is all I think local, and it was just really empowering for a lot of people to not have to set the stuff up and just have it be given to them. And so that like launched off this whole sort of Pangeo movement, which I think changed a lot of how Earth scientists and scientists generally think about what's possible with scalable computing. What we then found is that there were a ton of problems in managing the full development experience on the cloud. People wanted the same experience that they had locally on their laptops, but replicated in this remote environment. And that meant things like, why can't I just pip install things and have them show up when I show up at my computer next? Why can't I conda install things? Why do we all have to have the same Docker image we're running on? Or, I've got these two different environments I want to run on. Like, why are my notebooks not different between them? Or why are they different between them? That's really a pain. Or there's a ton of things that came up. Or how can I use VS Code? Or how can I use some other editor? How do I get this nice little Dask dashboard Jupyter Lab widget running in this environment? And so I actually personally felt a little bit burned by that experience of having to sort of own everybody's development environment, because data scientists are very, very picky about their development environments, it turns out. And so a designing principle of Coiled was to not force people into running in our development environment. They can run from anywhere, right? When we started, we're looking at a local a local IPython session. But I can run JupyterLab locally, right? And I can set up JupyterLab exactly the way I like it. And I can run Coiled from here, or I can run VS Code from my laptop, or I can run in Prefect Cloud. And I can connect them to Coiled. And so that sort of separation, I think, actually something that I cared a lot about because I didn't want to own everybody's environment. But it's also something that I think unlocks a lot of exciting capabilities. And hopefully we have time to get through those.
We have a quick question in the chat from Jonathan Larkin, who has a Docker image already, and he wants to know if he can use his Docker image on Coiled.
Yep. Yeah, so check out the docs. You can definitely do that. It's a super common request. But
Matt, this is super useful. I want to really emphasize that because I've had the same experience where I want some weird API from a data I want to add something that is non-standard, and it's very frustrating when you can't just edit your environment or create a new environment. And then when you're working with other scientists and you want to be able to share your environment. So I really like this capability. That wasn't a heckle, I'm sorry.
I was going to say you're also not, but it's okay. Hugo can't anti-heckle. You are allowed to anti-heckle. We don't.
Yeah,
Is that a heckle? Am I being heckled now?
I'm allowed to heckle each other, Hugo, but it's heckling. It's negative. You can't call it heckling.
Well done, Matt.
Let me try. I want to struggle with my infrastructure, and therefore I hate this. How's that?
Excellent work, Jeremiah. Wait a second.
I've
been blowing through things on this web page for a second. So I just said a long diatribe of why I don't want to own notebooks in the cloud. That being said, the demand for notebooks in the cloud is high. And so we made notebooks in the cloud. They're just not like as fully featured as you might want, because it's never going to be as fully featured as you want. So at the top of this notebook, I ran through all this stuff. We ran XGBoost locally, and that's nice, right? You can use Coil just to spin up notebooks and run local Python code with your favorite software environment today, right? Those notebooks are also authenticated, right? They have the right AWS credentials. They have the right Coiled credentials, so I can launch Coiled things from here. They're nicely set up. I've got my dashboard here. So I can give this to, people who maybe don't have as strong opinions about their local development environment. Maybe they're students. Maybe they're scientists that don't really care about how they operate. They just want to be given some curated experience. And I can go and run. I think this is running Dask data frame and XGBoost on the Higgs data set with that's good. So
Matt,
yeah.
I started this, you started this process, and it's going to take, let's say you're doing it on a big data set, it's going to take a couple hours to run. You want to work on a different project that has different funding. Can you just switch between different accounts?
Yeah. So when we made our cluster, I'll just make another cluster here. Let's use, so I was playing with, or actually, you know what? There's something right here. So this is a different configuration I was playing with earlier with Napari. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. And let's just make another cluster. All right, let's make a new notebook. Import Coiled. And you're also asking us specifically about different account and billing. And so I might build this to the Napari account. That's good, especially because this one has GPUs attached to it, I think.
And to be clear, this is a Coiled account that you're providing here.
That's correct.
Coiled account.
Coiled accounts can be associated to other kinds of accounts. I can even do this, inside the same notebook. I actually give a talk at GTC, NVIDIA's conference. I think it's coming out next week. It's pre-recorded. And in that talk, I actually launched two different clusters. I launched a CPU cluster and a GPU cluster in the same notebook. And I flop back and forth between them to see the difference in performance between the two systems. And if we go look at the clusters that I have running here, you see that I have two clusters running. We have this XGBoost thing and this previous cluster here, which looks like it's what we were playing with at the beginning. I also, under the Napari account, looks like I've actually got a couple things pending from before. And there's this one pending here. This is what's spinning up with Napari. So yeah, I can launch lots of different things. They're all concurrent. We're actually built on like very low level core cloud infrastructure. We're not using Kubernetes, we're using other stuff. And so we're actually extremely scalable. Like this will only run out of scale when Amazon runs out of scale. So anyway,
is there,
I did all those things.
Sorry, Matt, is there an easy way to see that? Can we see how many resources are being used by, the various clusters in my account by going in the Coiled dashboard or anything like that? Like if I'm in charge of billing for my team, just for example, I want to make sure where we are.
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. Right now, we have great real-time dashboards, sort of what you're seeing here, or 24-hour historical dashboards. We also have recorded everything that you've done. We don't yet have nice dashboards for that. So like I can go look at that because I happen to have database admin access. We don't have good views for that yet. But you're right. You'd like to be able to see how much time did Chris, your horrible employee, how much money did he spend last month? Or maybe across the
those
team.
are not words we use to talk about Chris ever. Ever.
Chris has been actually on the live stream. Everyone loves Chris. Or you might ask, how much money did I spend parsing CSV files across this team? And we are currently storing all that data. We have yet to invest in the flashy dashboards that will give you that information. But it's fun, and that's as you sort of increase in scale to different large organizations. It's actually the kind of question that a lot of groups are actually really happy to pay for. They want to understand if they're NASA, should we convert our data from netcdf to ZAR? How much would that save us? Which of our data sets are actually being queried? How do we make those decisions? And having the telemetry, all those actions, is actually helpful in making those decisions.
Is it possible, this is a kind of a side question, is it possible to start a Jupyter notebook in one of those environments that you set up?
Yes, so actually our Jupyter notebooks are just our software environments. We've just taken a general job launching capability and wrapped a little bit of UI around it, called them notebooks.
I see. Okay.
Other heckling? While all that was going on, we trained an XGBoost model at scale, which is neat, right? The fact that, a couple of years ago, I would have just been talking about how XGBoost and Dask have native integration, right? And that's a huge win for lots of people. What we found, again, is that while that's exciting, what's actually the bigger bottleneck to making that useful is making it easy to use. And now it is easy to use. Anybody who's watching this can go to cloud.coiled.io, log in with GitHub, and you can go and run this notebook and run things at scale. You can, use your own AWS credentials, and you can look at your own data and run that at scale. You can, spin up GPUs and try rapids and XGBoost at scale. And so a lot of things are now easier. You sort of tried very hard to identify what the big bottleneck was, or the big speed bump, the big barrier was to adoption. And we tried very hard to just crush that barrier. And that's kind of what Coiled is.
So Matt, let's just say I've never set up AWS credentials. How does Coiled make that easier? Because AWS is not.
Yeah, so one answer is we are also happy to manage that for you. So we see 3 different kinds of users, or maybe customers, if you want to get businessy. There are individuals who we're just going to manage the accounts for you, right? And that's kind of what, if you're on the free tier right now, that's what's happening. We will end up, once we get past the free tier, if you want more access, we'll charge you for the AWS costs, plus a little bit more to give us some profit. On the other extreme, there's companies that are, maybe they're on-prem, or they want everything to be very secure, and we just deploy the entire Coiled stack inside of their AWS account. That would be like NASA, for example. What's more common is in the middle, where you have an AWS account. You've probably been managing Kubernetes yourself a little bit, have been a little bit burned by it. It's actually costing you way more in engineering hours than your AWS costs are. And you want to sort of offload that. And those people generally are very comfortable constructing an IAM role and giving us access to that IAM role to run things on their behalf. And so that sort of hybrid approach ends up being, I think, where most people want to be, again, except for sort of the extremes where you have an individual student or all of NASA.
So Matt,
are you
Go on, Jeremiah.
Sorry, you guys, just curious, are you looking at expanding to other clouds as well? Is that on the roadmap?
Yeah, no, it's actually interesting. We about half of the companies who've said they want to engage with us are all on Azure. And so we're like spinning up Azure now. Sheer, if you're on the call, is doing the great work. There have been some larger groups that have wanted Google support. It's less common as far as we can see. But I think once you've done this, it sort of took us a while to get it like in a raw native way with AWS first. I think but the end result is like a couple thousand lines of code. It's actually like once you figure out the right ways to integrate with the cloud in like a nice way, I think we found the right abstractions. I think replicating this will not be terrible. But yeah, today, so Amazon, go ahead.
You'd spun up a coiled notebook, but then we moved to your local Jupyter lab.
No, I've just been flipping around. So here we were playing with Jupyter Lab locally. I just wanted to say that you can use Coiled from local Jupyter Lab. But when I was playing with XGBoost in this window, this is all running on Coiled.
That's your local Jupyter Lab.
No, this is I went to Coiled, cloud.coiled.io, went to notebooks. There's a few example notebooks here. I clicked launch, and then Coiled is setting up for us a job in the cloud that holds a notebook. And in about 1 or 2 minutes, there'll be a little launch notebook button that we can click on, and then we'll be in a Coiled notebook experience, which is just straight vanilla Jupyter Lab, but with all the authentication and proxying hooked in.
And if I run some notebooks and I get some results and I want to store the results.
Excellent heckling, Chelle. Excellent heckling. Yeah, no, we don't solve that problem at all right now. And this is where we got into the problem of like, how do you replicate the local development environment, right? Should we be giving you like an EBS volume that you store your stuff on? Well, what happens if you pip install? It gets a little wonky. And this is where I think we could use a lot of, like, as far as I can tell, there's no way to do this that pleases everybody. What I want to try next, I think, is going even harder into Amazon and using S3 as local persistent storage. Jupyter actually has these nice features that allow it to use other kinds of storage systems. And I'm thinking that is maybe like the lightweight composable way of doing things. But I don't know. And that's the thing, we're gonna have to like experiment with a bunch of things and try a bunch of things and see what fits. But you're right.
We've got around 15 minutes left.
Great.
What do we want to do?
Let's move on. So I'm gonna try to fly through a couple of extra examples. Jeremiah is here. And so I feel like I have to talk about Prefect. Or rather, I want to talk about Prefect because Jeremiah is here.
We don't need to do that. We can focus on Coiled today.
And also, because Jeremiah's here and Chris is on the call, who sent me some swag recently, I want to thank you all for this these incredible Prefect rubber duckies, which made my day when they arrived the other day, along with the other swag.
Briefly, just so you can share that.
I hope they brighten your bath, Hugo.
They definitely do. There we go. Great swag.
Yeah. So Chris White, who's a CTO of Prefect and a longtime friend and previous Dask developer, and I like sat down one afternoon to make like a Coiled Prefect example. So I'm going to show that example, and it's actually going to be pretty boring because both Coiled and Prefect are really just about making things boring so that they're effective.
It should be boring. I hope this is an extraordinarily boring example.
Yes.
Whatever you're about to show, I hope it's very boring.
But Jeremiah, it's a principle of yours that things should be boring, right?
If it's the only time our software is useful is when something went wrong for one of our users. So when things are boring, it means everyone is happy. Our software was out of the way, nothing went wrong, and they achieved their goal. So we like boring.
Awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, if you go to, let's show you like this. Yeah, so Chris and I said, what would it take to integrate Coiled and Prefect? We came up with something in like a few hours. You can go look at this if you go to, again, docs.coiled.io, and you go look at the examples. There's a nice little example here for Prefect. We actually intentionally didn't make this a notebook because I felt that it was good to have Prefect as like a non-notebook experience, just for how it's used. But there's things you can do here. And I've downloaded the script on the left, which does some prefect flow, which is all this stuff at the top. And then we tell Prefect to use Coiled, and we give it a pre-configured software environment, and we also ask it not to shut down the cluster when it closes. And that's.
I think I'm going to heckle you here. You're a lot younger than I am. I need you to increase the font size.
Yeah. So yeah, here's a Python script, and we are. I think what this does is it looks at that same New York City taxicab data set. It like chunks it up lots of different pieces. We have this clean function in there, which is actually there just to simulate some sort of failure, because Prefect handles retries nicely.
Oh, you are breaking your code. That's great. This is where I always get nervous. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, you gotta simulate some breakage somehow. And then I think we show for every hour, for every hour, we print out the best tipper of the hour in the city of New York. It's a fun little flow. You can go run it yourself. What I love about this is that this is all Prefect stuff. And then down here is the coiled bit, so Prefect has this concept of a Dask executor, or different executors on which you can run Prefect flows. And we tell it, great, go use Coiled. Coiled happens to meet all of the expectations that we have around Dask clusters. And we also give it some cluster configurations. So we say, hey, look, run this particular software environment. To your question earlier, we could specify some account that we want to run on. And what I've also done here is I've also told it not to shut down the cluster. That's one of my favorite features of Coiled. And you give it a name. And so if I run this, so right now this just ran. It took about a minute to spin up the cluster. Then it ran the flow in parallel, and then it was done.
And how big was the cluster you just used?
The executor, sorry.
The cluster, let's go take a look at it.
What's the difference between the executor and the client? A little bit fuzzy on that.
Prefect thing, and client is a Dask.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see.
Yeah, this is a little confusing.
I was getting mixed up between the two. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
a little confusing.
Executor lets Prefect know how to translate the workflow into your execution layer, which in this case is Coiled.
Yeah. So this script created a Coiled cluster, ran a Prefect flow on top of it, got us some results, and then the script closed. The cluster though is still running. So we've asked Coiled not to shut this one down, because we might want to run this script many times, right? We might want to run it. We want to run this thing 50 times and have them all share the same Coiled cluster. And so the second time that I'm running this, it's actually quite a bit faster. So it ran now not in a couple minutes, but actually in less than a minute. Well, you also, I'm not sure if you guys can hear this, but I learned that Prefect can, when it succeeds, it can send you a Slack message. And so let me see if I can bring this over, actually.
It's not intrusive at all.
This is so much better than all of the old satellite operators that used to have pagers.
Community,
Jeremiah. Is much better.
Are we heckling Prefect now? Because that I'm very good at. That I can do all day long.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually put my mic next to my speaker here. So this is gonna run, and when it finishes running, we're gonna see a message show up in Slack, and also show up audibly, which is fun.
This is what engineers think is fun.
This is the worst part of the live demo.
We've all been there.
I can't believe how brave Matt is putting up his Slack window, because every time I do that, it's open to a message that I don't want people to see.
Since when did live demos devolve into listening to Slack notifications?
Well, I'm not sure you've noticed here, but
2020 difficult enough, Matthew?
I would heckle this if it weren't my company that's part of this demo. I would definitely heckle this.
Yeah, no, we're working on TikTok integration, Jeremiah. Collaborating with Oracle currently.
Yeah. So
just wait for our Twitter integration. I'm counting on it.
I can't wait.
My terrible jokes will be automated.
So good.
Yeah, so some things that I like about this. One, it was actually really easy for us to get things running. Two, all the Prefect code and all the Coiled code are actually really separate. Like the integration here, just like use them both. There's nothing you need to do. And so this leads me to a question. This leads me to a question actually for Jeremiah, which is like, how should we think about integrating with Prefect? What does the Coiled Prefect integration look like to make Prefect users happier?
You know, it's funny. I was actually just thinking when you pulled up this code, and you can see very clearly the Prefect code and then the Coiled code down below. That separation is actually really healthy in an interesting way. So obviously, when we think about integrating, we're usually about meshing things together. But the fact that those are nice, separate, like legible blocks of code, which means they could come from different places, they could be created by different people, they could be imported as functions. That's like a huge sign of success, I can say, like for the Prefect team, because that means that you were able to use your tools, in this case, Coiled, without having to conform them to Prefect, right? There's just minimal, like one line where you specified the executor where they intersected. So at a first glance, first order, like that's a massive success in Prefect size. That's a very solid integration because, Matt, you said at the beginning of this, right? You wanted to be the dedicated DevOps team. And you were in that example. I didn't have to know Coiled. I wrote my workflow independently, and then someone else, I mean, you in this case, came along and was like, hey, run on this Coiled cluster at the very end. And that's a beautiful integration. However, one of the things that we are thinking about at Prefect is we know that once people start writing these things, they want to get them into the world. And we at Prefect are not infrastructure experts. We are workflow experts that happen to run on different infrastructures. And so making it even easier, we just talked about the separation is beautiful, but actually getting that to be first class would be something that would be really cool to explore, because I think that our users would benefit from a dedicated DevOps team. And that's not what we do. That is not us. We just can take advantage of it really cleanly.
Yeah, so my take on this, I mean, like it would be great for there to be a Coiled button on the Prefect side and a Prefect button on the Coiled side or whatever. My take on this is that there isn't really any integration that's necessary. Like you should be able to go through the Prefect signup process and the Coiled signup process, and you shouldn't have to do anything else. I think when we talk about integrations, we often talk about like lowering barriers that are there. I think what's nice in this situation, there are no barriers. Like the fact that we had to think about integrations in our mind means that somebody did something wrong ahead of time.
That's a fundamental philosophy that I agree with. If you have to plan an integration, you had something, you had a problem. The fact that we so beautifully synced up here, but it's because we both agreed on an abstraction, right? Independently and through Dask, really, we agreed on an abstraction, and therefore we were able to work together perfectly. And so, as you said, the next step is to go and go in the world and see like, okay, well, how in practice do people use this? Because the practice differs from the abstraction. And that's where we'll tail down the next set of frictions to make this even easier for people.
And so this maybe gets back to a few questions that were asked earlier on. I said, I kind of want to weigh on these questions. So Hugo mentioned, for example, like, hey, there's this weird warning about software environments. What's that about? So I think Coiled is trying something slightly different from like, you know, like maybe like the Databricks example. In a lot of sort of, or maybe the Cloudera example, a lot of these data science platforms, data engineering platforms, try to give you a world which is self-consistent, and they try to integrate things into that world. I think in Coiled, we're trying to say, great, we're just going to solve a DevOps problem and put this sort of scalable solution inside of your world. But that also comes with its own set of challenges. For example, like we need to match software environments between what you're running on the cloud or on Kubernetes and your laptop, or what you're running on Prefect. Or we need to, you know, handle authentication really smoothly, right? We need to like look at your local AWS credentials, securely get those in a way that doesn't concern you, and forward those along. And so we sort of traded one set of concerns. How do we like reconstruct a nice development environment in the cloud or in some platform for a different set of problems, which is like, how do we very smoothly transfer what you have locally inside of your world to where you want to run computation? And that is like a different set of challenges. Actually been really fun to play with. But I think it gives us a lot of our like really smooth user behavior. But it also like is like a set of challenges that people haven't really thought about that much before. And so it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, I hear echoes in what you're saying. When you and I were speaking at the very, very beginning, before Coiled had a name, I think, potentially, you laid out a vision for me.
Personally.
What's that?
I wanted to call it snake oil, personally.
I
You should have went with that. That would be amazing.
I'd say y'all made the right choice on that one.
High risk, maybe high reward, but
fun.
You don't want to be a snake oil salesman. You just, in general, you just don't. But at that time, you laid out this vision for me, which is very much the exact same thing that you're now, expressing in a much more well-structured way, I think, with the benefit of a couple of years of putting into practice. But it's really exciting to see.
Also, very briefly, it's worth noting that this whole thing wasn't built by me at all. I did not build any of this. It's built by a bunch of engineers working at Coiled. It's been a relatively small team so far. There's maybe like 5 people who show up at our engineering dailies. And we kind of started this probably in earnest in like May, maybe late April. So it's been really exciting to see how quickly that team has moved to create what is, I think, today the nicest way of running Dask anywhere. And I think also probably the most accessible way of running scalable computing, period. If you're listening to this live stream, you can go and do everything that I just did in the next 5 minutes. And that smoothness, that like low barrier to entry, something that we think a lot about maintaining, actually requires actually a lot of thought and design. So we hope you guys enjoy it and use it.
And strongly encourage you to pip and call Coiled ASAP. And I'll put the link to the cloud.coiled.io in the chat as well.
And Coiled is paying for it. We need to keep, like,
absolutely.
I don't know why we don't keep hammering this point. I was so shocked to learn that.
Yeah.
And
no, Matt's relatively bullish about our runway. So I think
it's just not that expensive. That whole hour cost me like a couple of bucks.
Yeah.
Right. And we like learned a lot of stuff in that hour. And we also
like a challenge.
We do everything that you should do, right? We use spot instances. We like turn off idle clusters. You can just leave something on. If you don't touch it in 20 minutes, we're going to turn it off. It's actually we like limit how much you can use. It's actually pretty hard to burn Coiled money. Because it's our dollars, we're actually really focused on efficiency. And that like puts us actually very much in alignment with our users and customers. If you're using Databricks, they'll just let you leave the cluster on all day. Like the defaults there are not in your interest. We're very much focused on efficiency and cleanliness. And it actually like, it incentivizes us to build the right thing.
Just turning into a Databricks heckling session, because I could get on board.
Next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I've posted the link to GatherTown where we're going to hang out. We're going to gather there and chat. Is there any Joe Schmidt commented that snake oil is the best self-heckle ever. Right? Which, as you know, running marketing at Coiled, I think I want to move away from self-heckling at that scale and anyway.
Fortunately, I am the CEO, Hugo.
Yeah. Hey, I like that. Fire me. There we go. I said it. I've been wanting to say that for months.
I love it. We've gone from product launch to like company development squabble. This is great.
I'm gonna
show us one last thing, Matthew.
I'm gonna quickly give a pitch for GatherTown. So it's really hard having a live conversation with 50 people or 100 people in a live stream. GatherTown, you're all in a like little Nintendo game, and the people that you are proximate to, you're close to in that game, the people who you can see in video and talk to. So it's a nice way to sort of naturally segment people spatially. And you can go see, oh, look, there's Chris from Prefect. I can go and walk over to Chris and then talk to Chris without there being 50 people in the same Zoom chat. So it's a ton of fun. We did it last time. It was a great time. Hope people will show up.
Have you seen this being used at conferences yet? Seems kind of cool.
I've actually never really seen it used except by someone pointed me to it. It's relatively new as far as I can tell. But I would love to see it be used at conferences. Yes, I think it would be perfect for that.
Well, thank you. Go on, please.
Just so you all know, Josh Meek, who's one of our Prefect engineers, has personally promised to build the TikTok integration.
Oh, great.
So you heard it here first. It's coming.
Well, I love that the only feature request we got out of this was actually a Prefect one. So thanks, hecklers.
But a brilliant one. TikTok is that's where all the big stuff is happening these days.
If we're allowed to use it. Great. Well, thank you all for joining, everyone viewing, but special thanks to all our guests and wonderful hecklers with a kind, generous spirit as well.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Matt, so exciting. So nice to see this come forward, and I am going to start using it. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you in Gather
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.